Hi everyone, welcome to the TriEssence martial art channel, a new episode of Kung Fulosophy, where we don't directly talk about martial art, but we talk about other subjects such as physics, science, philosophy, or anything else that's not directly martial art, but could still help you further improve your understanding and practice of Chinese traditional martial arts. And in today's episode, we'll be talking about a pretty unusual topic, which is gaming. So those of you that have been following my channel would notice that recently I uploaded some gaming guides for this new computer game called Elden Ring. And I believe a lot of my subscribers does not yet know that in my leisure time I sometimes play computer games. And even though we're in the second decade of the 21st century, however, I have noticed, I'm not saying my viewers and subscribers, but in general in our society, I have noticed when people mention about computer games or gamers, people tend to still have this very outdated perception of them being social rejects, losers, nerds, geeks, weebs, otakus, etc., etc. While that is accurate to describe a portion of the gamer population, one has to also remember that it's most likely people who fit into those social categories that actually end up playing game rather than social interaction, rather than games is what actually made them that way. So the causality, the cause and effect are often misunderstood. So just because somebody plays games, it does not automatically mean he belongs to one of the aforementioned stereotypical categories. Of course, this video isn't about sociology, so we're not going to go deep into that. However, today I'd like to talk about the positive influences that games potentially could have and how it could even potentially improve your practice of Chinese martial arts. Firstly, we'll need to dispel a common misconception, right? I don't know when it started, but probably around the time when movies such as Karate Kid are being popular in the West, that people have this very stereotype idea of what an oriental karate master, and later on, when Kung Fu became popular, a Kung Fu master must look like. The kind of old, white hair, mustache, wise kind of character, always speaking riddles.
But how do I know if my picture's the right one?
If come from inside you, always right on.
It's revenge.
Daniel-san, you look revenge that way. Start by digging to grave.
I mean, if you have seen Kung Fu Panda, that Master Wu Guai.
To do something, we can't just let him march on the valley and take his revenge. He'll...
Your mind is like this water, my friend. When it is agitated, it becomes difficult to see. But if you allow it to settle, the answer becomes clear.
That pretty much is a very stereotype, cliche representation of what most Western people consider as a standard Chinese martial arts master. What people often don't realize is that TV isn't reality. Unfortunately, in modern-day society, to a lot of people, TV is reality. But if you actually look at historical records, all the top names in Chinese martial community in the golden age of China, which is around the Republic era, they are just regular human beings like you and me. They don't speak in riddles, they're not particularly wise, they don't act like they are hermits from the mountains. These are all just commercial identities that are made to make movies more appealing. They are just regular people like you and me, and often some of them have all kind of hobbies that they do on the side, and some of them even lead very questionable lifestyles. Now, I will not go into that in this video, but if you're interested, I could consider making a future video to explore some of the questionable lifestyle and hobbies some of these very famous Chinese martial art masters during the Republic era were into. So long story short, you shouldn't actually be surprised that martial art practitioners such as myself are also into playing computer games. And while I do admit that there are a lot of gamers out there who daydream about being martial artists, being skilled fighters, and they only live that dream in their head and never goes out to physically fulfill it, it does not mean that everyone who practices martial art and play computer game are that type of person. It all depends on what the individual is getting out of playing computer games. If they play computer game as a form of escaping reality, of not facing reality, and of trying to live a life that they can't live in reality, for example, being a martial arts master or being a superhero, then in that case the game might not help as much in achieving real life goals. But if someone like myself who sees computer games as a form of puzzle problem to be solved and also a reflection upon your inner self, then I would dare to say that playing computer game can be very constructive for all type of areas in your life, including the training of Chinese martial arts. Now, of course, this is not to say that everyone who are watching my channel should go out and play computer games, right? If you don't like computer game, you don't play computer game, it's perfectly fine. The point here is not just computer game, but that a lot of other hobbies or stuff you do in life can reflect upon your martial art training and actually make it better. Of course, nothing replaces the actual training and learning of Chinese martial art. So if you don't have enough time to learn and practice Chinese martial art, then obviously don't spend that time doing other things such as playing computer games. But if you're already fulfilling your daily quota, weekly quota, monthly quota on your training schedule, and you still have extra time, then doing something else and change your pace, but doing something that can also reflect upon your training would actually be beneficial. And I'm not the only one who is saying this, right? One of the most famous Japanese samurai, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of, called Miyamoto Musashi, he has written in his book, the Book of the Five Ring, in that he actually described that a samurai should not only practice kenjutsu and know how to swing a sword and kill people. He believed that a samurai should see the way of the samurai, aka Bushido, through every aspect of life, whether it is cooking, flower arrangement, painting, calligraphy, poetry, literature. He believes that a real high-level samurai should be able to see Bushido in everything he does, and not only when he holds a sword. So what we can get out of this writing from Miyamoto Musashi is that if you do everything, but you only see the individual tasks in what you do, then nothing actually will connect and help you with your martial art training. However, if you can see martial art in everything else you do, then everything else you do is actually helping you to train martial art. And of course, I'll stress this again. Nothing replaces actual training. So you still need to spend time learning from a teacher and doing your own training. That cannot be replaced. But on top of that, you can improve it further. You can see the same principle, the same training you're supposed to do in martial art in other things. Now this might sound very vague and maybe even outright hippie. So let me explain to you how I see my own martial art training while I play game. So firstly, what you should know is that I don't just play any game. I'm very selective with the type of game and the titles that I do play because my time are kind of limited. While I have been playing games on and off since primary school to high school, etc., the first game that I really got serious into is a real-time strategy game called StarCraft 2. And for those of you that doesn't know, it is an e-sport game, meaning it's a competitive online game you play against other humans. And when I played that game competitively online against other humans for the first time, I noticed something interesting. Even though I'm not seeing that person in person, I'm only playing against a screen and someone on the other side that I can't see. However, it gave me the same type of anxiety and stress just like when the first time you fight somebody in a fight. When I start off with a match, I will get cold sweat on my hands, my heart will beat fast, and when we start to collide with each other in the game, my head kind of goes blank, my reflex goes down, and I'm actually just clicking, but I'm not actually sure exactly what I'm doing, and afterwards, when I think back, the whole process of that game becomes quite muddy and unclear. Just like the first time, or even the first few times that you get into a fight, right? So those of you that have been to fight definitely knows what I'm talking about. Where the entire process feels unclear, unreal, and almost like a dream. It's almost like you weren't fully in control of yourself during the fight the whole time. Like your brain think of something, but your body's doing something else. It's not listening to what you wanted to do. Or your mind just completely blanks out and your body does random stuff that when you later on think back on, feels really, really stupid. But as I keep playing, slowly you get used to it, eventually up to a point where I no longer feel stressed or anxiety when I match against another human player competitively playing for ranking. Of course, once this happens, it doesn't mean that if you fight somebody outside, you will not have anxiety either. Of course, nothing replaces the real thing. If you want to do well in fighting, you have to fight more regularly and get used to it through fighting itself. However, in playing a competitive game, it kind of made me realize the process that one has to face when going through this kind of fear, from having anxiety, from having a lot of stress, from blanking your mind out. You kind of just have to force yourself through that experience and eventually reach a point where it no longer matters to you and you can think very clearly while under stress. So here is the first potential benefit you could gain from playing competitive esports games. That it teaches you how to handle mental stress and anxiety when you are competing against another human being. Now you might think that having punches thrown into your face definitely is more stressful than playing an opponent over a computer screen, and you would be right. But besides the physical pain that you only experience through an actual fight, the mental stress that is induced upon yourself, whether it's from an actual fight, from playing a non-contact competitive sport, or playing a competitive game, it is actually not so different. The burden you receive on your psyche is actually quite identical. So long as you care enough about the game you play, and you care enough about winning and losing. Which brings us to the second benefit you could potentially gain from playing games, which is not to be so invested in winning or losing. When I first started playing StarCraft 2, I cared a lot about winning and losing, and in doing so, I sometimes cannot bring myself to play StarCraft 2 competitively because due to my pride and ego, I'm scared to lose, and the only way to not lose is to not play. But of course, if you never play, you'll never actually get better, so that idea that I never lost is actually only a delusion. And this is exactly the same psychological issue that prevents a lot of Chinese martial art practitioners from learning how to fight and actively engage in sparring because they're afraid to lose face. They feel like they should be winning, but when they actually go and try, they're not winning and they don't want to do it again, right? Especially a lot of people, the first time they get punched in the face, they get completely discouraged from ever trying sparring again and therefore never actually learns how to fight. And the fear of losing is also one of the main sources of anxiety for regular people who are forced into a fight. But as I forced myself to play more StarCraft 2 competitively on the ladder for ranking, and in doing so I began to lose quite a few matches, I reached to a point where I no longer care that much about winning and losing. And this is not to say that I don't want to win. It just means that I got used to winning and losing. So losing a match or 2 or 3 or 4, even 5 is not a big deal so long as I can learn something from those matches and win my next match. This is the exact same mentality Chinese martial art practitioners need to develop in order to actively engage in learning how to fight and engage in sparring training. I have seen a lot of people that the first time they get hit in the face, they feel like they've lost their honor or their face, or ego get bruised, and they never want to ever engage in sparring again. But what they don't realize is that if you never get punched in the face, you'll never learn how not to get punched in the face, and should you ever engage in fighting without a choice, you will still end up getting punched in the face. It doesn't fix anything, right? Just because you avoid the problem, it doesn't mean the problem goes away. It will still gonna be there, and should the opportunity arise, will still bite you in the ass. So the lesson here is to realize that we are all just regular human beings. It's perfectly normal for you and me to lose to a better player or a better fighter until we learn our lessons and get better ourselves. Do not hold the delusion that any of us are special from birth and that we should be winning against other players or fighters right from the start. That is what hinders a lot of Chinese martial art practitioners progress in learning how to actually apply their martial art in fighting situations. And I have encountered both in Chinese martial art community as well as in gaming communities such as StarCraft 2 back in the days, where players would pretend that they can play the game or they can fight, but when they are asked to actually play or fight, come up with all kind of excuses on why they couldn't. And in the end of the day, when push comes to shove, when they're actually forced to step out to a fight or forced to play a one-on-one match with me, then I utterly destroys them because I simply have more experience at it than them. So if you don't want to actually lose a match or a fight when it matters, then you would have to put in a lot of effort and lose those fights before the fight or the match that actually matters. The only way to ensure that you are going to be better than the person you are going to play against or fight against is that you have made all those mistakes before you've met him, played him, or fight him, and that you have already covered all the mistakes you could have made, and therefore you are a better player or a better fighter than that person at that current time frame. So there are no shortcuts, there are no miracle cure. If you want to play a game better, if you want to fight better, you have to learn by losing and learning from your mistakes when you lose. So I played StarCraft 2 for about 2 years, I believe, eventually to a point where I was ranked high diamond, between high diamond and low master league. So for those of you that don't know what that means, I was pretty much at the top 5 percentile of the entire European servers. And of course I'm at the low end of the top 5 percentile, but still better than 95% of the other StarCraft 2 players in the entire Europe, which also including all the players in Africa. It sounds weird, but basically Africa wasn't important enough to have our own servers, so all the African players we play on European server. Eventually I stopped playing StarCraft 2 because I was constantly traveling back to China for training. And StarCraft 2 is the type of game that if you take a 3 months break, your skill deteriorates severely and it's very hard to get back to it. And to get back to it, I kind of have to put more time into it. Also I started to work, so I just decided that, I don't have the time for StarCraft 2 anymore. And after that, I stopped gaming for a while and I moved on to a game called Guild Wars 2, which is a MMO, which stands for a mass multiplayer online game. And that's the first time that I played a game that had a very challenging PvE design. PvE here means player versus environment. So I'm no longer playing against other players, but we're a team of 5 players playing against the environment. In other words, obstacles and stuff that the developer designed to make the game experience difficult. And in that game, I was also among the top 5 percentile each of the player base. And you might wonder, how do you get ranking for playing a game versus environment rather than versus other players? Well, it's quite simple. In that game, there's a set of obstacles that you have to pass through. We call it a dungeon. Right? If you don't understand this, you don't have to. So the point is, we compete on which team of 5 players clears the entire obstacle the fastest. And at some point, my dungeon team actually held a world record for a little while for clearing a certain dungeon the fastest. And besides that, there were also these super hard dungeon content that requires a 5-player team to play. But me and my friend, we were basically either solo or we were 2-man clearing that 5-player content. And that's not because we have better gears, right? In Guild Wars 2, everyone has the same gear. You don't get superior gears. So it's not about having better gear, but the fact that we're very good at reading the boss's pattern and predicting what he's going to do, and therefore able to avoid the attacks that regular players cannot avoid. What brings us to the next potential benefit you could get by playing games. So instead of player versus player, which teaches you mental fortitude against another player, stress, and how to combat anxiety, it becomes more of how to coordinate your teamwork and carry out your tasks precisely and solve problems on the fly. After that, again, I took a break from constantly gaming because I was traveling back to China every year for my training trip. So time is of an issue and I can't really play an online game, which you kind of have to play all the time rather than once in a while. And this lasted until I came across a game called Monster Hunter World. It's a long franchise of Monster Hunter games, but I've only actually started playing since the second last title, Monster Hunter World. And what attracted me to that game is simply that my friend telling me that game is super hard. Majority of the players actually struggle to finish the game. So I was pretty much sold just by the fact that the game is super hard. Because for me, playing game isn't about escaping reality, it isn't about feeling good, it's about meeting an obstacle, a puzzle, solve it, and then feel good about beating something really hard. So for those of you that doesn't know, Monster Hunter is basically a game where you hunt a big ass monster. The monster have a variety of movesets that you have to predict and read based on his body position and pre-motion. So you pretty much, the way the monster stands, slight head toss, slight neck turn, slight foot position, all these other details you have to read on the fly to predict what the monster is going to do next in order to avoid being attacked. And in that game, you have 1/4 of a second, what we call an invincibility frame. So 1/4 of a second to do a roll. If you time it precisely when the monster hits you, you avoid the attack. And if you are too late or too early, then you get hit. And if you get hit a few times, you're gonna die and then you lose the hunt. And here you can see a clip of me playing Monster Hunter World, solo hunting the hardest monster in Monster Hunter World called Fatalis. Of course, if you never actually played the game, it's hard to understand what's going on. But basically, it's a dragon, has over 20 different attack patterns that you have to memorize and read based on the monster's body language and know exactly the correct timing to avoid being attacked, at the same time find openings to deal damage and to finish the hunt. I don't have the exact data on how many people could solo this monster, but it is a pretty slim percentile of the entire player base. Majority of the players either have to cheat or find a 4-man team to complete this hunt. Only a small portion of us are able to do this monster solo.
Now obviously, if you haven't played this game, it's very hard to appreciate how hard hunting Fatalis actually is. Let's just say that I know around 12 friends that plays Monster Hunter World, and out of them only myself and Eric are able to solo hunt this monster successfully. And if you were to browse the Monster Hunter forums, there were a lot of players asking for help in completing this hunt because they cannot do it on their own. And what's hard about this hunt is that not only does the monster has a lot of different move patterns that can potentially hit you, all his moves at least takes away 80% of your health, meaning 2 hits from him and you die. And furthermore, a bunch of his moves can also potentially one-shot you, meaning if you get hit by certain moves, you die straight away. And you only have 3 lives per hunt. If you get killed 3 times, you fail the hunt completely. You need around 12 to 15 minutes of highly concentrated gameplay where every moment if you make the wrong decision, the monster could kill you in order for you to complete this hunt, which brings us to the next potential benefit of playing games, which is to practice your concentration span. Now of course I know gaming is definitely not the only thing that can train your concentration. Martial art training by itself should improve your concentration, but as I always been saying, gaming is a pretty good supportive method to further improve your concentration. And of course this only applies if the game content itself is hard enough that if you don't concentrate, you are going to lose. And in these clips, I might have made this Fatalis hunt look quite easy because I'm not getting hit most of the time, but do keep in mind that if you're not a very good Monster Hunter World player, you won't last 20 seconds upon meeting Fatalis. So in order to win in a game like this, first you have to observe, see the monster for the first time, and start taking mental note on what kind of moveset it does, what move can potentially chain into what combo, and then after that, come up with solutions on where you can roll, dodge, and iframe to avoid being attacked, and then have a highly concentrated mental span over a long duration of time in order to finally rise victorious with this type of hunting. And these same qualities are definitely also needed during martial art training, especially fighting.
And from here you should notice a pattern that no matter what game I'm playing, I always tend to end up in the top 5 percentile of the player base. Obviously I'm not here to brag anything, but this just shows you that for me it's less about the game I play, but more about the approach, the logic thinking behind the approach and the mentality and the attitude toward doing something and getting good at it, right? There are players out there who play some game for a long time and never get better. And of course, those kind of players, in my opinion, don't get as much benefit out of playing games. For them, it's purely a hobby, right? They don't want to think about it, they don't want to get better, they just kind of brain dead, almost like on a Sunday drinking beer on the porch. See, if you take game like that, then obviously not saying you shouldn't take game like that, right? Everyone should play for whatever their own benefits. But if you do play casually like that, then maybe gaming doesn't exactly help you in other areas of your life, for example in Chinese martial arts. But if you do take playing game, or in fact anything else you do in life seriously, and seek to understand what you do, and find a way to improve yourself and improve your skill in doing that, then that's exactly the same mentality one should have when it comes to training martial art. I've also equally known a lot of Chinese martial art practitioners who've been practicing for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, even 50 years, and they are so bad at it. Precisely because they only do it as a casual hobby. They're not actively trying to think how to improve their training. They might tell them, you do this form, they go back and do the form. They don't go a step further and think, why am I doing the form? What should I be getting out of the form? And when things doesn't work, maybe come up with a better solution, right? There's a famous saying, insanity is when you repeat the same thing over and over expecting a different result. So if you have been doing Chinese martial art for 5 years or even 10 years and you're not getting any better, then clearly something is amiss. And you should try to get to the bottom of it and find out why you are not getting better. And there are also people out there who've been doing 10, 20 years and think they are getting better, but when they compare to other practitioners who have trained similar time, the skill gap is huge. In those cases, then I would say most likely those people are not progressing in the regular pace that they should. Of course, everyone's got their own pace of progression. I'm not saying that you should always progress at the same rate as the most talented practitioner, but there should still be a rough time scale, right? If you have spent 5 years or even 10 years in Chinese martial art, but you're not really becoming a top level practitioner, then either you haven't spent enough time or you have been training incorrectly. If you don't have enough time for it, then of course that's your own fault, nothing you can say. But if you just spend the time, but you're not getting closer to the top end of the 5 percentile of Chinese martial art practitioners, then clearly something's wrong with your training. And my advice is that you should seek a better master. Anyway, that's beside the point. So the point here is that the attitude of self-improvement, of striving to get better, of seeing everything you do as a puzzle that can be solved more efficiently, that kind of attitude is what's supposed to help you in Chinese martial art. It's a sensible attitude one could develop if they're playing game in a constructive way. And that is one way that gaming can actually help you with martial art training. Besides the first point, right, where I talk about how it helps you with your mental fortitude, combat anxiety and stress when you are competing against another player, which can be translated into fighting somebody for real. Of course, fighting, nothing replaces the real thing, you need to still fight. But what if you can't find a sparring partner on a regular basis? And also, sparring partner, you can end up knowing them, become friends, and you no longer have that anxiety. It's different from facing a fresh stranger that want to bash your head in on the street or in a competitive ring. So either way, being able to do something competitive against random people is actually good for your mind and body to kind of get used to dealing with anxiety and stress in a competitive environment. There are also times, that after failing to beat a boss or hunt a monster 100 times, I start to develop self-doubt, like maybe I can't do this, maybe I'm just not good enough. And this is also the type of mental issue that, I learned to deal with a lot while playing games. And once you can deal with these issues, it will also extend into other areas of your life. When you're actually fighting somebody, especially in a self-defense, life and death situation, if you have self-doubt and you can't work your problem off, you're probably gonna get hurt or get killed. So you don't want to face these life-altering decisions when you actually have everything on the line. In which case, gaming actually provides a pretty safe environment to work through these mental problems. Everyone's got self-doubt, right? But the more you face it, and eventually through perseverance and hard work, and smart thinking, overcome the situation. The more you do that, the more you develop a type of confidence that you know that you can solve this problem. Your hand isn't slower than others, your reflex isn't slower, and your brain isn't inferior. You just have to think smart and keep working at it and overcome the obstacle. And yeah, so at least I can't say this for everyone, but for myself, through playing these super hard games, I am able to overcome, to a degree, issues about insecurity and self-doubt. But of course, the key here is not only to induce these feelings upon yourself with whatever activities you do, but also be smart enough to reflect upon it and think about this, analyze it, deal with these problems mentally, eventually overcome it. Obviously, if you keep playing games and you let these self-doubts fester inside you instead of eliminating them, then in that case, maybe gaming actually do you more harm than good. So it all depends on what you actually do with any activities that you partake in. It's less about the activity itself, but more about how you seize it and how you can turn that into something of personal growth.